Dan Rubenstein, the season, at least the regular season, is now officially in the books. We had 9 conference championship games. We're going to talk through all of them. We just did a long live stream looking at Oregon and Penn State and SMU and Clemson. And it's good to be back with you, my friend. How are you?
I'm good. I guess technically, however you feel about Army-Navy next week, the American champion Army Black Knights.
That's right.
You had that, I assume. All right. I wrote that down somewhere. I'm great. Ty, we are in the shadow, in the wake of Oregon taking down Penn State in Clemson with a last-minute, tiny, impressive, all the same, victory over SMU. And we've got a full slate of Friday and Saturday action to get to. And it's a different kind of conversation this year, Ty. It just is.
It is a different type of conversation, to say the least. We have 9 conference champions that we can now report to you on the podcast. Please hit follow. Please hit subscribe. We are not only going to be doing a reaction podcast to the games that we just saw transpire Friday and then the ones that just wrapped up a few moments ago. We're also going to be getting back together on Sunday at noon. For people listening to this in time, we'll be reacting in some capacity around noonish to whatever the committee decides to do with this 12-team playoff field. This is the time where we need to do these things, where we need to hop on and talk about them at a moment's notice because there is a lot going on. Here are the games of note. With regard to the Power Four,
yes,
Oregon knocks off Penn State 45-37. Georgia beats Texas 22-19 in overtime. Good game.
Great game.
A lot of defense. Clemson won on a 56-yard field goal at the gun, 34-31 over SMU after holding an early 21-7 lead. It looked like that was going to be a runaway train. And Arizona State won the Big 12. That one was a runaway train. Arizona State impressively finishes off Iowa State by a 45-19 score. Not to be outdone, the group of 5, Ohio wins in resounding fashion 38-3. Marshall 31-3. Boise 21-7 wins the Mountain West. Army 35-14 wins the American. Yes, my lock of the year, Tulane, did not come to fruition. And last but certainly not least, Jacksonville State wins 52-12 over Western Kentucky to win Conference USA. G5 games, most of them were kind of runaway trains. On the Power 4 side, though, I think we had 3 pretty good games. I think we ended up with 3 pretty good games. Oregon, Penn State, Georgia, Texas, Clemson, SMU. The later games that we saw on Saturday, all 3 of them, I think, leave us with a lot to talk about.
Oh, my God, yes.
Where would you like to start first? Which is the most important game to kind of lead with here?
The most important game to this show, hosted by an Oregon and Penn State alum, I'm going to say the Big Ten championship game. I'm sure people disagree, but we just did a live stream with that. Those are 2 teams ranked in the top 5. Do we have any other top 5 matchups?
Well, we had number 2 Texas against number 5 Georgia, but
okay.
Tactically speaking, this was the highest ranked matchup, and we can start there. Yes, we did the live stream. I am wearing my Happy Valley shirt. I am wearing my retro Penn State hat. Your Oregon Ducks win by a 45-37 score.
Yes.
This was a game, the manner in which it started out, it felt like Penn State was in a load of trouble because initially they just could not stop Oregon. And truly, throughout the game, they couldn't stop Oregon. That's kind of the recurring theme. But they did find a way to claw back into this thing. Penn State was able to move the football a lot better than I think both you and I expected. But am I wrong to just oversimplify and say that Tej Johnson's ability to get open over the middle of the field, 11 catches, 181 yards, caught 11 of 12 targets, mind you. He was just open the entire game. Am I wrong to say that that was the turning point, or that was the thing in this matchup that really tilted things in favor of Oregon?
I mean, that was the most consistently successful element of this game. Tej Johnson over the middle, yards after the catch. Oregon obviously came up with 2 huge interceptions and huge moments that set up huge things. In the case of Nico Reed at the end of the game, it clinched the Big Ten, essentially, or clinched an opportunity to clinch the Big Ten for Oregon on that deep pass down the sideline. And obviously Dante Manning deep in Penn State territory, intercepting a ball and bringing it down to the 1-yard line to set up a quick, I think it was Jordan James, touchdown run there. So I guess those are the 2 most important things. I'm sure Penn State fans listening or watching are also going to yell, the refs are the most important.
Listen, I'm wearing the Penn State hat, so I've got license to do that.
Yeah.
There were some interesting no calls in this game. That
Sure.
is not why Penn State lost. Okay. That is not why Penn State lost.
Two things can be true. Yes.
But there were some interesting no calls, and I was on our stream. This is why I'm a little raspy. I was screaming, holding
right
at least 3 times. There was a missed catch from, I think, Omari Evans down the left sideline that he clearly cradled, and they didn't call. They didn't even go to review.
Picked up the first down 2 plays later.
Picked it up. It was a nice pass, right, to Trey Wallace. But alas, there is that side of it. I feel like there were a lot of issues with that this weekend. But that being said, I thought an impressive showing from Oregon. I actually thought, just from the Penn State side of things, their ability to run the football was truly a breath of fresh air. This is not to say they weren't able to run it this year. I don't think I've seen them run it this well all year. And I certainly did not expect it against a defensive front like Oregon. I don't think you expected to see it against a defensive front like Oregon either. I mean, when push came to shove later in this game, it was not Drew Aller dropping back and trying to throw bombs. I mean, that's kind of how the game ended. But the way that Penn State got into this game late was just by running the football. 35 times, 292 yards, 2 touchdowns, led, of course, by Katron Allen, 14 for 124, and Nick Singleton, 10 for 105. Those guys were able to impact the game in a really big way, each of them busting off a bunch of big runs. This was a shootout. This was not a game dictated by defense, not in the least. And it was a game that, you had a few things go, I think, Oregon's way along the course of the game. And the fact that Penn State just never came up with an answer for Tej Johnson is, for me, that's what did him in.
Yeah, and literally the ball bouncing Oregon's way on that Dylan Gabriel fumble as well. That would have given Penn State the ball deep in Oregon territory, and Oregon fortunate to have that ball bounce basically directly to Dylan Gabriel. I think that's all right. I think what Penn State, this is what people say about college basketball, game of runs, right? That Oregon comes out as strong as they do on offense. Then Penn State comes out strong. Oregon jumps out after that interception. It's 28-10. Penn State cuts it to 28-24. Oregon gets a field goal right before the half. And, I was sort of down on Oregon as an Oregon human at halftime, thinking like, well, this defense is just that maybe it's tired legs. Maybe it's just, not being able to play against a team with an offense quite like Penn State's for a long stretch of this season. They just haven't. And on the flip side of that is they're winning a game against a team as talented as Penn State, having the best offensive half of their season relative to opponent. If you're able to withstand that and get 20 minutes to, recollect yourself or whatever, Oregon was in an okay place. They came out, they got more stops. They kept Drew Aller at least more off balance than he was in the first half, got off the field a couple times. It was the missed Penn State field goal. And Oregon was able to eventually pull it out. Big third down, whether it was Terrence Ferguson, whether it was Jordan James, big third down conversions. And, they weren't perfect offensively, but I don't know, when you score 45 points and really 38 points, if you're going to take off the interception, run back to the one, even 38 points against this Penn State defense is it's a pretty impressive showing. And for Penn State, I did not see this offense playing, especially on the legs, on the back of Nick Singleton, both on the ground and through the air in the first half. The touchdown pass to, remind me who it was to in the back of the end zone. Amari Evans was exceptional. Drew Aller played a great game, was caught a little off balance at key moments, but all things considered, I don't know, both teams played well and try hard.
I think was pressing. Was pressing at moments. And, we've seen that throughout the course of the season for him. The interception that effectively ended the game was sort of a bad decision. But, Penn State had its back up against the wall. They were trying to make a play. And
I don't even hate that play call, even if they don't have the receivers.
I don't hate the play
call. They had one-on-one on the outside.
I don't hate the play call. I think it was the wrong decision, but hindsight's 20/20.
Yeah.
Penn State acquitted itself well in this game. I think Oregon's offense remains maybe the most impressive thing I saw all weekend. And they're going to be the number 1 overall seed now.
Yeah.
So congratulations to Oregon on winning their Big Ten title in their first year in the Big Ten.
Yeah.
And congratulations to Penn State for getting there, and I think for playing a pretty good game once they did.
Yeah. By the way, you can't spot a team as good as Oregon. All of those penalty yards, all the personal fouls in the first half. You can say whatever you want about the refs not calling penalties on Oregon. You probably have a good case about it. those calls were on Penn State.
Georgia 22, Texas 19.
Yeah, man.
Overtime. Carson Beck got hurt in this game.
Last throw of the half. Yeah.
Last throw of the first half. One of those deals where he's just dropping back to throw a Hail Mary. Gets hit. It was a fumble. Texas damn near scored on a scoop and score. It didn't come to that. A couple laterals. Didn't end up happening. But suffice to say, they had to go to Gunnar Stockton.
Right.
You could see Carson Beck on the sidelines. He's got that tattooed right arm. He had it wrapped in ice. He did come back in. He did have the dramatic game-winning handoff. Did look a bit noodle-armed. He came running out. It was hanging there. Like, it didn't know what body it was attached to. But suffice to say, they end up winning this game 22 to 19. What are your thoughts on Texas here? What are our thoughts on Texas? Because, well, I have many, and I'll turn it over to you because I think you can articulate them a little bit better. I think it emphasizes a lot of what you've been saying all along about Quinn Ewers.
Quinn Ewers, I think, did more right than not in this game. I think it was Matthew Golden and DeAndre Moore he had a nice connection with today. Texas has a championship defense. Flat out, they have a championship caliber defense, and both sides of the ball make too many mistakes in terms of penalties. And when there was like an absurd stat that Texas was outgaining Georgia something like 197-8 at some point in the second quarter, and all they had to show for it was like a 6-3 lead. That's when you're in trouble. That's when, if you're able to move the ball and not finish drives, and the team you're playing has enough firepower on both sides of the ball, as Georgia does, was not a good game for Georgia offensively. Obviously, Carson Beck going down has a role in that, but he wasn't doing much when he was in there.
I mean, Gunnar Stockton came in and gave him a bit of a spark.
He did.
A bit of a spark. This is not to say Gunnar Stockton was Joe Montana out there. He wasn't.
No, but
he gave him a little bit of a spark. It was a little bit of a different look. He was more mobile. Either he's faster or they just didn't trust him to throw it as much, but he was running. But to the point, like, Georgia continued this trend of just dropping passes. There were a bunch of instances in this game, especially some big ones from Arian Smith, where, we talked about it coming into this one. All three of their top targets had drop rates north of 10%, which is comically large. So the fact that we saw it again in this game, it's more of a feature than a bug at this point. But still, the feeling I came away from this game with was exactly what you described. If you're looking at this game kind of in retrospect, if you're a Texas fan, you're looking at this and you're saying we had a million chances here.
They missed the field goals. Yeah,
we had the field goals. I mean, it just felt like they had a million chances to win this game. It was there for them. Defensively, they played pretty damn good.
Yeah, of course.
They had a ton of chances. My lasting impression was this felt like one of those Georgia games that we have seen the last 5 years, where maybe they're not dominant out there, but you just sort of know, you get that feeling in the pit of your stomach as you're watching that they're going to find some way to win.
You've got to finish. You can't let Georgia hang around. They're going to ephus their way to a win. And in this case, they're going to fake punt their way to a win, right? Florida. Texas gets them. It was 4th and 5 or 6, I want to say, when Georgia pulls off a successful fake punt. Like, you can even, maybe to a lesser extent, point to special teams in this one. Between that and the missed field, these were not chip shot field goals for a very good kicker in Bert Auburn, but in a game that close, and you first and foremost blame an offense. Field goals are, to a certain extent, failures, and so you blame the offense. There were just opportunities galore for Texas, and we've said this before about any other team: the good teams, mediocre teams, bad teams. You got to stack little things. And Texas did not stack little things when they had the opportunity to against Georgia. And that's finishing drives. That's, being locked in on possibilities on a 4th and 5 punt near midfield. It just, Georgia was able to get it done. Thankfully for, I'm sure, Kirby Smart's blood pressure in one singular overtime after the game against Georgia Tech. And they are your SEC champs.
Now, the conversation will be interesting around Georgia and Penn State. Penn State came into this third. Georgia came into this fourth. We will talk about the other teams that I think make this conversation a little bit more fruitful.
Okay.
How much are we penalizing, if at all?
You mean Georgia or Texas?
Texas, excuse me.
Yeah.
Texas was one, but
Georgia's in. They got the bye.
Georgia's in. Georgia's going to be the number 2 overall seed, in my opinion. How much do we punish Texas? How much do we punish a team like a Penn State? In both cases, it was a one-score game. In this case that we're describing, it was an overtime game. I can't see the committee dropping Texas all that far. By my estimation, Texas is a surefire number 5 seed at this point. They're going to be the top at-large seed going into this tournament. I will post as a result of this conversation that we're about to have. For people watching the stream, I'll put up my projected playoff bracket based on now the completed action with Conference Championship Week. But I can't see dropping Texas all that far. They lost twice this year. Both were to Georgia.
In overtime in this case. So they got better against the SEC champ. Yeah.
And Penn State, I think it's going to be pretty similar. Penn State was behind Notre Dame to start the week. I think they stay behind Notre Dame to end the week. I think everybody shifts down one because of Texas. But it'll be interesting to see where the committee comes down on that. They have talked about not wanting to punish teams that play in conference championship games. However, did leave themselves some wiggle room in the event that something weird happened with SMU, which is where I'm going next.
Right.
SMU and Clemson. Clemson wins 34-31, 56-yard field goal at the gun. Did you tell me that Dabo Swinney quoted Lloyd Christmas in his post-game address?
So you're telling me there's a chance kind of way. Yes, he did. And not just happening to say the line. Use the words to quote the great Lloyd Christmas. So he attributed the quote. Yeah.
Clemson is going to be in this tournament. I don't think Clemson is going to get a first-round bye. My guess is that they're just going to be one of the lower seeds, but because they won their conference, they're going to get in.
They're a top 5 conference champion. Yes.
SMU, though. SMU is going to unlock the fury of the SEC universe, the Alabama-loving universe, the Greg Sankey universe on college football for the next 12 hours.
Yeah.
It was a close loss. SMU, if you watch this game, was down early. It felt like it was going to be a blowout. It wasn't a blowout. SMU found their bearings, found a way to get back into this thing, tied it late on a nice touchdown pass from Kevin Jennings, who balled the hell out. He had a really good game. Clemson gets the ball. Clemson drives the field. Clemson's able to kick a bomb at the goal at the gun to end up winning this game 34-31. So impressive on a couple different levels from Clemson. The way they were able to use Bryant Wesco out wide was something that I talked about in the preview. I sort of panned it a little bit because I said the lasting impression I got from watching all of Clemson's games this year was that the offense wasn't super creative and it was a lot on Cade Klubnik. But in the event that it works, like it did tonight, it really works. That's why they won 34-31. So Clemson is in. How much, if at all, should the committee be looking at SMU and saying they're in or they're out?
I think you put them in. I'm great with SMU in. I'm great with their season. I'm great with their resume. I'm great with what they can and can't control and the manner in which they beat teams that they beat, the teams that they lost to, the teams that they beat. I'm great with SMU as a top. If they were a top 10 team, what were they ranked heading into this weekend?
Yeah, 8, something
9,
like
8 or 9.
8, yeah. Somewhere in like the lower half of the top 10, but a top 10 team.
I don't know how playing Clemson and going down the way that they did and scratching back and after a disastrous opening 4 minutes, essentially beat Clemson.
Yeah.
They didn't essentially beat Clemson. They lost to Clemson. Let's be clear. Clemson is the ACC champion and in good reason. But they didn't lose this game in embarrassing fashion. They were in position to take this game to overtime to beat Clemson. And Alabama, if they wanted to be in the playoff, if we felt like Alabama had a good case to be in this playoff, you beat Oklahoma and Vanderbilt. That has to be on the list. And SMU does not have an embarrassing moment in the last 2 or 3 weeks in the manner in which Alabama does. And I'm just going to weigh the last month or so in a pretty heavy way. And Alabama not playing for their conference championship, I don't know. if we're saying we're not punishing teams, or kind of saying it, or pseudo saying we're not punishing teams, nothing has changed with Alabama this week. You've got no more data points on Alabama.
I mean, Clemson and SMU effectively played to a draw.
SMU has done nothing to change my mind that they're a top 10, 12 type team.
Yeah, they effectively played to a draw tonight.
Yeah.
This was a field goal at the gun, a bomb at the gun. Again, it started off very pro Clemson, but SMU came on strong, and I think acquitted themselves really well. Like I said, Kevin Jennings started to cook in the second half. You got to see what he was all about if you watched this game. This was on as we were watching the Big Ten game, and we were kind of flipping back and forth discussing both of them. I think you got to put SMU in. I mean, you can put them in at the back half of the 12 if you want to dock them any points, but I don't see how with a loss this close, you kick them out entirely. It's one thing if you lose by 17 to the number 17 team in the country. It's another if you lose at the gun on a long field goal. I just feel like they deserve a little bit of grace for that. I believe their only 2 losses are now to ranked opponents, right? Clemson at 17 and BYU before that.
Yep.
So there's probably a case to be made that there's, strength of loss, whatever. I'm pro SMU in this argument, and I'm curious to see how the committee handles it because I think they deserve to be in.
By the way, scheduling 2 power conference teams in their non-conference portion in BYU and TCU.
Yeah.
I mean, they were probably going to be playing TCU regardless because it's the skillet game. Here's look, not to go down the rabbit hole too much with pay attention. This is a Disney ESPN playoff. Okay. And the SEC is a fully Disney SEC. SEC is a full Disney ESPN property. How many people are going to be truly meaningfully? How many meaningful people in the sports business world are going to be upset that SMU is not in and Alabama's in? It's a TV show. It's a TV series.
I understand that's what it is.
I'm not saying Alabama should be in. I'm just telling you.
I understand that.
A year after it became painfully clear that it's a TV show and the ESPN playoff wants ESPN properties in the ESPN TV show, you have to consider it.
I mean, the way that I have this laid out, it would be, I believe, Texas against SMU in round 1. If you're a Disney executive, you would much prefer Alabama against Texas. I have no doubt.
Sure.
I'm not a television executive. I don't give a damn. I think it should be SMU. I think it will be SMU. But I would not be surprised if it were Bama at this point in time. We'll see. But this is a fun game. It didn't start out that way, but it ended in rather dramatic fashion. So 34-31 was your final. The only other Power 4 game was a huge blowout in favor of Arizona State, Dan. I mean,
well, by the way, any thoughts on the game itself on SMU Clemson?
No, I think I said it already. I think the way that SMU came back, they acquitted themselves well. I think they proved they belong on the field with a team like a Clemson.
Stuffed Phil Maffa and Clemson on the ground.
Clemson
did a really nice job.
Nothing on the ground. I mean, Kevin Jennings started to show in the second half what he was all about. Brashard Smith, who I talked about in the preview, had a really nice game.
Yes.
This is a team that can beat you a variety of different ways. And when they're not shooting themselves in the foot, when they're not getting behind the 8 ball the way they did in the first quarter, they can play with just about anybody. They really can. So what do I have to say about this game? I thought SMU, even in a loss, acquitted itself well, and they belong in the playoff.
Yes. And a nice game for Cade Klubnik. Not an incredible game, but a nice game when you consider both his ability with his legs and through the air.
It's all on him. It was all on him.
And by the way,
it's all on him. So
it's all him, right? The whole plane is made out of Cade Klubnik. How about little old Clemson starting the year losing 31-3, 34-3, something like that to Georgia, just getting blown out of the water.
Yep.
And then coming back, having a really nice year in the ACC. Granted, backing into this game, but all the same, you can only beat the teams in front of you. You can't control all of the circumstances. Syracuse got them in here and winning the ACC. That's not too shabby, Ty. That's not too shabby at all for Clemson.
The other Power 4 game was Arizona State 45, Iowa State 19. This was the blowout game.
Yes.
This game was an absolute nightmare for an Iowa State fan. And it kind of emphasized something that we have alluded to this entire season with Iowa State. Iowa State has exciting pieces. Iowa State has certainly had exciting moments. And I think at the end of the day, Iowa State is still a pretty good team. When Iowa State shoots itself in the foot, it blows the whole damn thing off. Okay.
Yes.
They had 3 turnovers on their first 3 drives of, I think it was the second half. All of them led to touchdowns by Arizona State. That gave ASU the clearance, but ASU at that point was already winning. Okay. And that's not necessarily the reason why Arizona State won. Arizona State won because they were able to get Cam Scattaboo in space early, often, and to great effect. 208 total yards, 2 rushing touchdowns, 1 receiving touchdown. Truly, and they talked about this on the broadcast, it wasn't that Iowa State was out of position. It was just that, Cam Scattaboo was breaking a ton of tackles. And if Cam Scattaboo wasn't breaking the tackles, somebody else was breaking the tackles.
Right.
Iowa State had a tackling problem this game. Nick Saban at halftime talked about, well, maybe they should try to tackle him a little bit higher. They're trying to go low.
Right.
Cam Scattaboo, they're bouncing off him like he's a Super Bowl.
Right.
They showed the graphic. He had something like 140 yards at halftime, 90 after contact. It just didn't seem like anything they tried could improve their tackling, could toughen them up at the point of attack, could get any sort of momentum going one way or another. And then there were the turnovers and the other mistakes that I think accentuated it, made the whole thing worse.
Right.
Arizona State, these last few weeks, as I think Brett Yormark tried to allude to, I think he went a little bit over the top in his post-game speech when he did the trophy presentation. Arizona State, I won't go as far as him and say that they're the best team in the country the last 6 weeks of the year. But Arizona State is scary if you draw them in round 1 of the playoff with all their momentum right now and the confidence they see.
So no Jordan Tyson,
no.
Which didn't matter fully, obviously. And ASU was able to get, I think it was Malik McLean. Was he Penn State transfer?
Yeah.
They had a big catch from him, sort of a throw it up downfield. He came down with it. It might matter against somebody in the playoff. It likely will, to not have your clear best receiver. But you're absolutely right. Can I say something else about this game real quick?
Please.
You nailed the preview to this game other than the winner.
Yeah.
You're like, you gave your reasons why you liked Iowa State, which were all correct. You were like, you made this point and that point, and you like Rocco Becht, and you like Jaden Higgins, and there's all these reasons. And you're like, the thing that gives me pause is they can't at all stop the run. And that worries me against Cam Scattaboo, that they're 129th in yards before contact.
The yards before contact stat. This was one of those instances where it actually did matter. And on top of it, something else that I didn't really go too much into detail about, but their tackle success rate, which there's a little bit of voodoo with how that's
right.
how that's calculated and all that. And I always get questions about it. So I don't bring it up unless I have to, but that stat also indicates that they just weren't a great tackling team coming into this game.
No.
And it is against strong running teams, typically that you tend to see that. We saw that in the Tulane game. Frankly, we'll get to that a little bit later.
Yeah.
That was another instance where the number says this is a poor tackling team. You go against a squad that's able to run the football, able to gain some momentum running the football. That's when that thing starts to show up. And it did in a big way for Arizona State here. Again, 45-19. This game was over. I mean, it was over at halftime. It felt like it was over at halftime. When Iowa State was able to get the ball in the second half, you're thinking, all right, this is when they mount the chart. It totally came off the tracks for them, and Arizona State wins in resounding fashion. So,
yes.
Talk about incredible seasons. Arizona State finishing 10-2, coming out of nowhere, picked to finish dead
11-2. Yeah,
11-2. Excuse me, picked to finish dead last in the Big 12. Ends up winning the Big 12. Another conference newcomer winning. Just amazing.
Conference of Champions, the Pacific 12, Ty, taking down the mighty Big 10, the mighty Big 12, Oregon and Arizona State. You have all this chaos in the Big 12. Oregon taking down Bill Walton's truck stop conference.
That's right.
Feels good.
The other one here that I think has real significance from the G5 ranks is the Boise State UNLV game. Ashton Ginty ran wild.
After starting, he didn't start slow. UNLV did a really nice job sort of building a wall up front and then collapsed.
It collapsed. 209 yards and a touchdown. UNLV surprisingly had a lot of trouble on offense. They did.
Yeah.
And I was impressed by the showing that we saw from the Boise defense. UNLV had something like 327 total yards, but 86 of them came on one run. UNLV had 11 possessions, 6 punts, 2 turnovers on down, 1 missed field goal, 1 interception, and only 1 touchdown. 21-7 was your final. I watched this one sort of kind of commentating it, I guess you could say, in our Verballer Discord. We had a voice channel going talking this through. And
Verballers.com. Yeah.
Verballers.com. Haj Malik Williams seemed rattled.
Oh,
for a good chunk of this game. Like, just was not able to outpace Boise defenders to the edge, which I think jumped out at me. And whatever Boise did this time around as compared to the first one, which they very easily could have lost. I don't know if it was being at home. I don't know if it was the air stagnation advisory. It was kind of hazy if you watched the game.
UNLV dome team going outside, going to altitude, going to the cold.
I don't know what it was, but this looked like a UNLV squad that was kind of a shell of itself as compared to that first matchup we saw, I guess at the end of October, whenever it was.
Boise State just beat them up. Boise State beat them up. UNLV looked confused. You mentioned the Haj Malik Williams thing. Boise State, for them to have some of the struggles defensively they've had this season and then lock in the conference championship game, super impressive. To do it only losing to the number 1 team in the country by, I think, 3 points.
Yep.
Crazy year for a first-year head coach. Can you fact check me on that? Spencer Danielson, first-year head coach?
First full year, yeah.
First full year was the interim guy and was looked at, was it Malachi Nelson, the USC quarterback transfer?
Gave it to Maddox Madsen instead.
And then doesn't even win the job, and they're like, oh, okay. Yep. Maddox Madsen has a mostly good year, a little bit up and down here and there. Obviously, they have the singular offensive talent in the sport in Ashton Ginty. A lot of people's Heisman winner, but a crazy impressive year from the Broncos.
Is this the spot where we should talk about Army and Tulane, or do you want to talk about my
lock of the year?
Where's my sound?
Lock of the week.
I was stunned at listening to you pick Tulane off of a loss, taking themselves out of playoff conversations, going to the frigid Hudson Valley to take on an option team. Like, okie doke, Ty.
Well, they played an option team earlier in the year.
They're not all the same.
They're not all the same. I get that. But
the Army dude throws it like 17 times a game.
He threw it 2 times in this game, I think, for 17 yards.
Yeah.
So they played an option team. We saw they had a ton of success against Navy. I acknowledged up front, yes, Army is not Navy. I think Army is way better than Navy, but still, Tulane gave us the proof of concept here. Tulane proved that they can beat Navy and 35-0. They killed them. That game wasn't even close.
Right.
Army obliterated Tulane. This is my lock of the year.
Tulane over Army. Yeah.
Tulane over Army. Army scored on their first 2 possessions. They never looked back. Tulane had 0 answer for Bryson Daly. He had 4 touchdowns. They looked extraordinarily sloppy on top of it all. It was the worst game I have seen Tulane play all year. And I will just credit Army. I will credit Army for their system. I will not try to make excuses for why Tulane looked the way they did by talking about look-aheads or playoff deflation syndrome or any. No. They had no answer for Army. Speaking of yards before contact, I didn't see the stat in this game, but it felt like 1 million. It was just ridiculous. They were getting blown off the ball. Army is now 11-1. They win the conference. They have one more game against Navy next week.
12-1?
11-1. They're 11-1 because they have one game next week.
Oh, because of the way they're scheduled. By the way, first year in this conference.
Another first.
I've been an independent. Like, okay,
year.
we'll join the American and destroy it.
So, Army not going to get in the playoff. It's going to be Boise. However, Army had an incredible season. They have an opportunity to go 12-1 next week by beating Navy. Tulane, meanwhile, just, I don't know, a lumpy 9-4 season. They lost to K-State and Oklahoma. They lost to Memphis and now to Army. I don't know. I had higher hopes for this team. There were definitely moments this season where I was much higher on them. However, the way they closed out here was not exactly awe-inspiring.
No.
To say the least. Elsewhere in the G5, let's just round this out, and then we'll circle back to the playoff conversation. Ohio, Tim Albin has since left to take the job at Charlotte.
Reportedly, yes.
Reportedly. But Ohio won 38-3. They gave up 3 points to Miami and then went on a 38-0 run. Almost 300 more yards for Ohio in this game. Oof. They just pounded Miami. I mean, they just pounded them. The Miami defense forced one punt in this game. That's the kind of matchup this was, as the Bobcats would.
And we both liked Miami. They beat them by double digits, and it was like a kind of an empty double digits, too.
You know who didn't like Miami?
Who?
Tim Chalamet.
Timbo Chalamet.
Timbo Chalamet. He went Bobcats in this one. He was all in on the Bobcats.
Wrong. And he was good, though. He started out, wrong. Sorry, excuse me. We were wrong. Chalamet, as always, until some of the later picks, until he picked Texas and SMU, I believe. Chalamet nailed Ohio,
which not bad picks in retrospect. I mean, each only lost by 3.
They were right there. Yeah.
What else do we have here? We had Marshall winning over Louisiana 31-3. The weirdness with Charles Huff seems
it wasn't even close.
Yeah, that wasn't close, but we'll have to wait and see what happens there. I don't know. Conflicting reports one way or another, but some weird contract situations going on there with Marshall and Huff. And in Conference USA, Jacksonville State won by 40.
After losing by 1, right? Like 6 days ago?
I think they lost by 2. It was 19-17.
Oh, okay.
But whatever. They win by 40. And so I'm wondering if my theory of the look ahead to the second version of the Western Kentucky game is actually what happened here. Because
the rope-a-dope?
Yeah, they had 562 yards. They more than doubled Western's output. They just smoked them. This was never even close.
56 carries for 386 yards. Shout out Trey Stewart and Tyler Huff, both dudes.
Both dudes, big-time dudes. Jacksonville State 9-4. The question around Jacksonville State has nothing to do with Jacksonville State. It's around, is Rich Rod going to be the next coach at West Virginia?
Right.
We'll see. That is your action. I think this is where it leaves us, okay? For those watching the live stream, I'm going to flash up a bracket here. I'm going to talk through it. For those of you listening to the audio, I'm going to do my part to try and describe it and tell you what I think. I think collectively what we think. Maybe there is some wiggle room one way or another with respect to who is seated where. But, Dan, this is what it looks like, okay?
Okay.
Right now, I've got your first 4 seeds as Oregon, Georgia, Boise State, and Arizona State. I think that's the way it breaks down. I think that's the way it has to break down. You're not going to put ASU above Boise yet. Maybe you could. I don't think they will because Boise was already ranked higher. You're certainly not going to bump Clemson from 17 up above any of those guys. It was a close win. Okay?
Right.
I think those are your 4 teams that are getting first-round buys. I think you slide Texas down. I think Texas, as the number 2 team, loses in overtime. You don't want to penalize them. They need to be your top at-large team. I think Notre Dame, who was ahead of Penn State before this week, stays ahead of Penn State this week. I think they're the number 6 seed. I think Penn State stays where they were at. I think they remain the number 7 seed in this tournament. I think Ohio State stays where they were at. They're the number 8 seed. Tennessee goes to Ohio State. I've got Indiana as the 10, traveling to State College. I've got Clemson now sliding in as the 11, squaring off against Notre Dame in South Bend. And I've got SMU at number 12, traveling to Texas. Now, the SMU thing is where the conversation is going to go. We know 11 of these teams have to be in the playoff. The SMU one is going to be interesting. There might be some different seeding near the back half of that 12. My rationale for putting SMU 12 is that you've got to put Clemson ahead of SMU now. You should put Clemson ahead of SMU because Clemson beat SMU in the conference championship game.
Like 11 minutes ago,
11 minutes ago. So I slide Clemson in as the 11. I've got SMU as the 12. I think this sets up, again, your first-round matchups of Texas hosting SMU, 5-12. Notre Dame hosting Clemson is 6 versus an 11. Penn State hosting Indiana, 7-10. Ohio State hosting Tennessee, an 8-9.
Right.
If you are looking at this bracket, if you're drawing it up, I won't talk through the full thing on the audio version. It doesn't really translate that well. Let me just say, if you're a Notre Dame fan, I think you like your chances. If you're a Texas fan, I think you like your chances. If you're a Penn State fan, I think you like your chances, especially with some uncertainty now around Carson Beck. That part remains fluid, to say the absolute very least, right?
Right.
But that's where I'm at right now with respect to this.
Again, if you're watching it, you're seeing the bracket up here, and everything looks pretty appealing. Clemson did not play Notre Dame this year, despite Notre Dame's ACC deal.
Yep.
Arizona State would be playing the winner of Texas and SMU. Oregon would be playing the winner of Tennessee, Ohio State, I believe in the Rose Bowl. The interesting thing to me is having Georgia at 2. That's not interesting. They should be the 2. Having Penn State at 7 and Indiana at 10. I think it's very easy to see a universe in which the committee is going to say, like, we don't want a Big Ten game in the first round of this playoff. That, like, this is supposed to be this big new novel thing, all these new matchups, this big step forward for the postseason.
New
of the sport.
Tradition,
right?
And
I don't know.
Hearing that.
How do you jigger with the seedings so that Indiana doesn't play Penn State 10-7 matchup in State College? Because everything else feels, even though Clemson has played Notre Dame with some regularity, everything feels new and exciting.
There are two ways that you could do it. Okay. You could get hyper aggressive and you can move Clemson from 17 up to number 10 and slide Indiana down.
Okay.
Indiana finished with 1 loss to a pretty good team.
That's tough.
And that doesn't really make a whole lot of logical sense.
Right.
I think the more likely scenario is that SMU is not penalized the way that I've set it up here. Right. SMU as a top whatever team, I've got them sliding in on the back half of the 12 as the 12 seed.
Right.
There is a world in which the committee says, we know you lost to Clemson, but it was close. We're still going to keep you ranked above Clemson. And in that instance, there's probably a world in which Indiana slides down to the 11.
Okay.
Where Clemson gets in as the 12 and where SMU gets in as the 10 and they end up going to State College.
That would be the thing I would look out for. Something that doesn't fully make sense that the committee is then going to work backwards from to bend themselves into a pretzel explaining why, just so we don't have an interconference first round matchup. Like, there is nothing especially, I shouldn't say nothing. Those are 2 excellent teams. That's a spicy matchup, but there's nothing new about seeing this kind of thing. We saw Indiana, was Indiana Penn State last year? Did they play? Like, it's just a Big Ten game.
It's a Big Ten game. Yeah, I don't know. I mean, this is my best guess as of now. This is all going to change in about 12 hours from now when the committee decides it's going to drop its official rankings. We will find out exactly what they think. Again, that show is at noon Eastern time. Dan and I are going to hop back on the stream here, and we will absolutely be talking through everything going on. We will do our part to try and, I don't know, make sense of whatever the committee decides to do.
Right.
So make sure you tune back in for that. Some of you will be listening to this perhaps after those rankings have been revealed, in which case we apologize. We can't control the schedule here, however much we might like it. It's just one of those deals, but that's my best guess as of now. Agree to disagree. If you're out there and you feel differently, I'd love to hear from you.
Did you think about Boise, Arizona State in terms of a 3-4 question?
I did a little bit, and I jotted down in my notes, actually, that it doesn't seem clear to me that Boise shouldn't be the 4 and Arizona State should get the benefit of the doubt with the 3.
Right.
Especially with how much momentum they've kind of taken on here this last half of the season. So I think there's probably a case to be made there.
Boise, by the way, if whatever it matters to you or doesn't matter to you, Bill Connolly has a resume SP plus rank. So it's not just what your strength of schedule is, but how efficient and successful you are against that resume. And I believe Boise State is ahead of Arizona State pre-conference championship.
Yeah.
I don't know how that would affect things with the ASU win over Iowa State and the Boise second win over UNLV. But I think winning the Big 12 is more difficult than winning the Mountain West.
Yeah.
And I look at, if you're going to talk yourself into Arizona State at the 3, which again, let's pull out here. Let's zoom out a little bit. This is an insane thing that has occurred.
It is.
That we have these 2 teams outside of the top 12
It is.
that have made their way into like the conversation for 3 and 4, just because we have to placate everybody all the time. That Arizona State losing to Cincinnati, which if this is the game you have to discuss, that's not great for Arizona State's, but that was a Jeff Sims game. That was not a Sam Leavitt game.
I don't know. Write in. You've got about 12 hours to do so. solidverbal@gmail.com is the email. You can also leave comments if you're watching or listening on YouTube. Send us tweets and the like. We love to hear from you and get your thoughts on this, even after the field is officially unveiled. Again, we'll be doing kind of a live reaction on the YouTube channel at noon Eastern time, and then putting out a podcast immediately thereafter. Mindful of the fact that the committee is going to release this field at noon Eastern time, they also are going to release their top 12 rankings. Now, bear in mind, the rankings and the seedings are different.
Right.
They are different. Okay. It's one of the confusing aspects of this whole system. But in that interim period, before we know any of the particulars, going out to verballers.com, you can sign up for the free tier. It's entirely free. There are no strings attached. A link dropped about an hour ago with a link to a form where you can vote in our Verballer Top 12 poll. So weigh in. Let us know your thoughts. We'd love to hear where you think these teams should be ranked. We could very easily translate from that a college football playoff bracket. I will do that, and we will talk about that on our Tuesday episode, which is forthcoming. But we'll see. Again, it's been a long day of doing this with you, and we've got our 9 conference champions. I think we have a pretty good sense at this point who our playoff teams are going to be. There's some deliberation as for the seeding and as for that last team that's going to get in the field, but by and large, this thing is set, Dan. I guess now with the benefit of hindsight, knowing all that we know through the course of this season, through the course of conference championship week, how do we feel about everything that we saw this season? I mean, in the span of time that we've been doing this since 2008, this was one of the crazier seasons I can remember, where
Sure.
for whatever reason, I don't know if it's Nick Saban walking away. I don't know if it's more transfer portal activity. I don't know if it's because of NIL, conference realignment. Could be a multitude of things, but it felt like there was just a tick more parity.
Sure.
Which led to a ton more unpredictability. And from our standpoint, just looking at the numbers, who downloads, listens, and watches, a real uptick down the stretch here as this playoff got a little bit closer and people were curious, if nothing more, to see what the field was going to look like. We still don't know at time of recording, even though we have a pretty good idea. But this sort of mystery, I think, attached to this season the full way through has been a breath of fresh air in some sense.
Well, my favorite team went 13-0 tie in a power conference, so I got to say this season was pretty great. I don't have a lot of notes.
Yeah. 5 stars, no notes.
Here's the interesting thing. When you have a 4 playoff universe, other than Notre Dame, it seems like the teams that are in the conversation for making that 4-team field are playing this weekend. Yeah. We got to sort them all out. Well, they didn't do this. They got to do this, but they beat this. I don't know. It felt like there was a lot of, what was the air stagnation? Was that what was in Boise?
Yeah. Air stagnation warning.
Air stagnation warning. It just felt weird that we're having this conversation about Notre Dame, Tennessee, Ohio State, Alabama, maybe. Like all of these teams that are just not a part of the games this weekend. That they're just like a lot of teams sitting at home like, oh, well, we didn't have Indiana. Well, we didn't have to play. Yeah. We'll see where we end up. It's kind of cool that we get an extra off week ahead of the playoff to get healthy and get things sorted out and get more data on teams we might be playing in the first round of the playoff potentially. Right. Like that part felt weird about this specific weekend, but otherwise, look, signing day was a few days ago. The portal is about to open, but there has already been a number of players announcing their intentions to enter the portal. There's a lot happening all at once. And so that's kind of different, even with, and coaching news, of course, all happening at once. And so it feels even more chaotic and dramatic. And I don't know how people sort of drink out of a fire hose, the information fire hose all the time, because it just seems like this is the apex of how fast everything is moving. So in that regard, it feels very different. But during the season, I wish there were certain games that mattered more. We're zooming in on games that I don't think we would have in previous years. That like, yeah, Alabama losing to Oklahoma. That's that's it for the Tide this year.
Yeah.
But you're like, well, they lost that game 24-3 against a team who went 500. But that happens.
Yeah. One other point of clarity I should mention. I see some people have noticed this. I appreciate that. I think I said earlier that Notre Dame was ranked ahead of Penn State. They were ranked ahead of Penn State in our Verballer top 12 poll.
Right.
They weren't ranked ahead of them in the college football playoff.
In the less important college football
in the less important college football playoff rankings. I do think as a result of this loss now, because Penn State has 2 losses, I do think they're going to be bumped below Notre Dame.
Not punished, but bumped.
Not punished, but bumped. Okay. You could argue that the matchup against Indiana, if it comes to that, it's a little bit of an easier matchup than Clemson anyway. But listen, we're arguing over specific spots at this point. It's all going to be moot in about 12 hours anyway.
Right.
Any parting shots here before we let the fine people go? We've got a long day ahead of us again tomorrow, reacting to all of this becoming official. Do we want to do any dude alerts? Do we have any names that we want to call out?
I mean, Sam Leavitt seemed to be the most perfect player. I mean, in what he was able to do in this game without his number one receiver. There were a lot of great performances. Tez Johnson. We don't need to make it formal.
Cam Scattaboo, right? Cam Scattaboo is sort of like a retired dude at this point.
He's on the edge of a Heisman invite to New York, maybe. I don't know. We'll see.
I mean, he has put his team on his back. He's been incredible. Even Kevin Jennings deserves a dude alert for the game that he put forth in that second half against Clemson, albeit in a losing effort. Just a lot of really good individual performances this weekend. Why don't we do this?
Well, I do want to pass down some wisdom.
Oh.
My great-grandfather said this. My grandfather said this. My father said this, all to the next generation. And it never made sense to me when I was a child. And I don't know how they could see this coming so far ahead of time.
Where are you going with this?
But they all agreed on this one thing to pass along to the next generation. And it was, whatever you do, don't hire Scott Frost. And I didn't understand it. And he's back at UCF. That's my parting shot.
Scotty Frost back in the game. Oh,
yeah.
My God.
Back
Talk about a news dump right in the middle of everything going on.
Yeah, it was right in the middle of, I think, the Texas-Georgia game.
Beautiful. Beautiful. All right, folks, we're going to leave it there. Thank you for downloading, for listening, for supporting, for watching, for playing along at home. We will be back on the airwaves tomorrow, noon Eastern time-ish, reacting to the official Field of 12, taking your comments, reacting to your questions, and the like, recording another podcast. Sunday's a work day for us here, given all that's going to transpire tomorrow. We'll start getting news of bowl games. We'll talk about all of that on the Tuesday episode. We're also going to detail the game that we've got planned for this postseason. Last couple of years, we've done something called Winter Wonders. This year, Dan, we're working on the graphics. We're working on the sounds. Got a little something we're going to call Bowl Bingo, yeah?
Oh, my God, I can't wait. It's going to be weird and fun, highly addictive, and prizes, Ty.
You have never played a game like this before. Bowl Bingo. Why don't we leave it there? Go on out to verballers.com, sign up to vote in the poll, or to further support what Dan and I do by becoming a certified or premium Verballer. If you made it this far, hit follow, hit subscribe. We've got a long way to go here. We've got rankings, we've got brackets, we've got playoffs, we've got the entirety of bowl season, and before all that, we've got Army-Navy next week. A lot more to discuss. For that guy, Dan Rubenstein, for myself, Ty Hildebrand, as always, stay solid.
Peace.